So a few years ago, I had the lucky opportunity to be able to buy a house in the countryside. Um, Lovely old house, stone walls, nicely renovated, rolling green fields. Not very many people, so very calm, very peaceful, great for work, good air quality and all of that. And the house came with a couple of acres, or hectare if you would prefer in that measurement, of land. So being a city person, I kind of realized, well, my lawnmower that I use for pushing along a lawn is probably not going to work for 2 acres of land. And I thought, well, I better get down to the machine dealership and see what they can do for me. So I was there. We had lots of discussions, of course, and they gave me some options, right? So the first option was a lovely kind of mini tractor type thing, would be perfect for what I needed, but was really expensive. The second option, and the one I moved away with, was a compact sit-on-track lawnmower, and it was fabulous. It didn't completely break the bank, so which is good. And I was very happy because now I didn't have to rely on asking local farmers to cut the grass, so I had my independence. The problem is, of course, I took a solution which was maybe not completely adapted to what I needed, and it worked, so that was good. But, of course, I had lots of wear and tear, lots of issues, and with issues comes maintenance bills, and a whole nightmare. And so that's where I am today with my small little sit-on lawnmower, but it kind of does the job. Now, what's the moral of the story here? The moral of this story is, first of all, independence is not free. Second of all, you have to invest wisely. And third of all, if you get the wrong solution or you invest on the cheap solution, you don't have sovereignty. You have a deferred bill. Now, apparently, I'm going to talk about digital sovereignty and not lawnmowers. So maybe we can go to the first slide. Or we could end there if we just want to talk about lawnmowers. That's fine as well. Oh, it's me that does the clicker. Okay. Okay, cool. You can tell I didn't just arrive 2 minutes ago. Okay, so the global software market is huge. We already know that. 824 billion in revenues in 2025, which is a fairly significant amount. Unfortunately, or you could take it both ways, half glass full, Europe takes 23% of that. We'd like it to take more. I think you guys would like it to take more. But the open source market is taking around 6%, so 49 billion, which is still pretty significant. And that's global, by the way, that's not Europe. Okay, so there's an economic incentive towards having more open source and having more of Europe in that. We all know this is not a great surprise. I think that one of the messages on this slide is, I don't know how many of you realize that the organizations that sit behind what we call open source are very much US dominated these days. Now that's historic. In many areas and for many reasons. But if you take the Free Software Foundation, the OSI, the Creative Commons, they're all based in the US. Yes, they do have European branches, I'm aware. Same thing for the internet technology stack. So ICANN for domain names, W3C, to a lesser extent the IETF. These are all US based. If we look at development platforms and languages, 60% US-based. I don't have the list here, but I could send it to you. It's in an article I published last year. And if you look at, of course, the foundations of open source, the areas in which we kind of are churches, if you want. Places like the Linux Foundation, the Apache Foundation, Mozilla, Finos, Eclipse, OW2 of course, very significantly US-based. Now 50%, if you look at just the number of foundations, you could say, oh, well, it's 50% US, 50% the rest of the world, but in fact, that hides a disparity in the size of the foundations. So there's an incentive here and a driver around the notion of open source and digital sovereignty, but we need to be careful about what we're really talking about. Now, in terms of organizational resilience, I think you guys are probably best placed to tell me about organizational resilience, but we know that companies like to have freedom to respond when contract terms change, and to ensure that their local values are upheld, and that those values aren't overridden by foreign commercial or legal pressures. Same with vendor pricing. Right, vendor lock-in, not a great thing, one-way street. I'm sure you've already had a bunch of talks that have touched on that, and I'm not going to go over that more. And geopolitics, it's in orange, so that must be an important point for some reason. The one that kind of gets left behind in the discourse is the social contract, of course. So citizens are expecting transparency and accountability from the institutions that are serving them. Public money, public code. We want to be able to scrutinize what's going on. We want to have our data held in local jurisdictions. You've probably, or you may have read in the news recently over the last few days, but it's probably been going on a while. There's some polemics going on in the UK about the use of AI for the police force, AI solutions being provided by US companies, and maybe they're not the best in terms of aligning with the value of London, because it's London that's in question on this one, or the Financial Services Authority, and there are others. So there's quite a big question around this. So when we talk about digital sovereignty, what are we really talking about? Well, digital sovereignty is actually a continuum along a scale. So at the individual level, we talk about digital liberties. Control of personal data, digital tools, freedom to choose your software. I want this browser, not that browser. I want this OS for my mobile phone, not that OS. I'd like to be able to install this software on my computer. Organizationally, takes it to a next level, of course. So it's your company now needing to have the freedoms of choice. And then when we come up to the national or regional scale, we're talking about digital sovereignty, where we're talking about, or mainly, digital infrastructure, geopolitical considerations, regulatory compliance, and economic and industrial policy. So what's interesting here is when you look at all of these points along the scale, the digital independence, let's use that as a catch-all, is actually based on the same ideals. It's about being able to choose where you put your data, who supplies your services, and these kind of ideals. So what changes is obviously the actors and the scale of the subject in question, but not the fundamentals. Time travel, we've gone backwards in time. Okay, so what does it look like in practice, digital sovereignty? So I think Europe now is very much starting to wake up to the question of digital sovereignty, and that's fantastic. There are some clear policy positions that are being taken. So you look at the public money, public code policy. That was a campaign that originally came out of the Free Software Foundation in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, but is now something that's part of French law and Danish law. Maybe other countries as well are adopting similar policies. Germany banned Microsoft 365 back in 2022 because of Cloud Act and data protection. France has more recently banned the use of Zoom and Teams for at least the government usage. So we see that policies are starting to be put in place. And that's great. So we have to obviously celebrate that. And we also see that backing up those policies, and it's not just hollow words, there are actual initiatives. So we have the Eurostax initiative, the DCEDIC initiative, we have Zendis, we have governments who are taking service contracts with open source service providers so that they can help maintain the open source that they're using. And we see that there are ecosystem developments. So for those of you that are in OW2, you probably know that OW2 for the last few years has been involved with the NGI Zero distribution of Cascade funding from Europe. But there's also the Sovereign Tech Fund in obviously coming out of Germany. And I understand that there are big discussions on the way for a European tech fund. So great. And of course, we're going to see tomorrow, I understand, Europe's technical sovereignty paper, position paper, or something that will be published. So that will be interesting to see. So from policy to initiatives, great. It's all happening. And we know that the companies that are involved here, and we know that open source companies are actually showing that this movement, this shift, has a real economic value. So the local vendors are generating something like 31 billion, and it's probably way more than that, in European FOSS valuations, disclosed European FOSS valuations, because a lot of open source companies don't show these valuations. But what we do know is that the investments and the value of open source companies in Europe is creating jobs, skilled technology. We're keeping that technology and those skills within the region. Now, on the next slide, I have actually a few... I've gone backwards again in time. I tell you, it's Back to the Future today. So here's a table of some FOSS evaluations. Okay, so to the best of my knowledge. The top 4 account for 31 billion. So these are valuations based on venture capital and that kind of stuff. The rest is on disclosed revenues. So as you can see, it's not insignificant. Which means that open source is not just a policy instrument, it's also a commercial instrument. Okay, so we're talking about digital sovereignty, and we know that with great autonomy comes great responsibility. So your sovereignty is earned, it's not granted. You must take care of your open source elements, whether it's security or compliance. Sometimes even European projects get that wrong with the Euro office only office dispute that's still ongoing. It means that governments, as well as companies, so these slides kind of apply to both. Remember, if we're really talking about digital independence more than digital sovereignty in reality. They need to have good governance in place to manage what they're doing, have multiple vendor options and support options, choose open source from active communities, have deployments or solutions that can be ported, and establish holistic risk management and education. I think education is an important one. I don't know how many schools are teaching open source today. Obviously, you guys aren't teachers, so you're not going to come back with an answer on that one. But I'm pretty sure there's not many higher education establishments that are teaching the business of open source. So actually, earlier this year, I had the great fortune to be invited to teach a series of lectures to students on doing an economics master's degree at the University College Cork. So we went through over 6 lectures, what's open source, well, what's a computer already, what's open source, how do we use it, where does it come from, the foundations of how it was created, and where it's going today, what are the business models, what are the risks that should be taken into account, all of that great stuff. So when I talk about education, I think this is something that we have to do better. And whether it's a company that's helping to educate their employees or going out into the community, or whether it's local communities bringing open source into schools. And stewardship, obviously quite a well-known topic within the open source communities, right? So the tagline here is FOSS without the right conditions is not sovereignty, it's wishful thinking, and I think that talks for itself. By the end of this talk, I will get the hang of the clicker. Where are we? So there are 3 conditions that I have identified when we want to talk about open source and digital independence or digital sovereignty. The first one is you have to master the technology, right? I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but me, I don't know how to repair my tractor, and I have to send it to the garage constantly. And that, well, it's not a tractor, it's a lawnmower, but you get the idea. Which costs money, means I'm not independent of them. Same thing for open source. Train your people. Right, be able to inspect what you're using, understand it, and act on it. This is not just a cost. You're building organizational value and organizational resilience by doing that. Business alignment, the capacity to configure and extend your software to your needs without needing vendor permission. So, I mean, that's obvious, right? Open source gives you all of those that enables all of those rights. But it only enables those rights operationally if you're not giving all of your support and maintenance over to an external maintenance supplier, a single vendor. Because if you are, you're really just locking yourself in, but it's under a different logo than lock-in or proprietary lock-in. And one of the key benefits of open source is being able to have an influence and a voice in the roadmaps. And again, if you're not mastering the technology, you won't get a voice. All of this means that when we're talking about digital independence, if you don't master the technology, or to master the technology, you need, you will have one of the foundational pillars of digital independence, but that's a decision. So at a political level, it's a political decision. How much will we invest in the knowledge and to act on and use technology? Haha, right one. Sovereignty requires control of your infrastructure. That should be fairly obvious, right? But you'd be amazed at how many companies are still not getting this. I think there's probably as many offerings. I mean, everyone has an offering, a sovereign platform offering, right? Everyone and his dog, as the expression goes, right? So yes, we have a sovereign offering. It's open source. Look, there's lots of open source, and we're basing it on pick your cloud provider of choice, or amongst the biggies. The problem here is there is a whole load of impositions which are downplayed. They're not so much hidden, and they do come out. For example, Microsoft came out in the French Senate and and said that yes, it doesn't matter where our data centers are, the US government can ask for access, right? But they're not talked about, or not talked about very much. So you have to don't believe the hype of the lobbying sales force. That's not the company. That's the people. Don't believe the hype of this sort of lobbying that goes on around these sovereign solutions. Understand where you're hosting your solutions and what extraterritorial access can impose on them. Okay, third one. I know I've run over time, but I'm nearly finished. Third one is the most important one in some respects. Sovereignty requires a locally governed ecosystem. Locally governed ecosystem, yeah. That's you guys, for the most part, I'm thinking. So what we need is an ecosystem of actors, whether it's developers, whether it's foundations, that are not constantly living hand to mouth. Now, I know this is a story that keeps getting repeated endlessly, sustainability of open source, and we talk about developers, and that's fantastic because obviously without the developers, open source doesn't exist. But let's not forget the foundations as well. Okay, so the foundations are the right vehicle to publish open source. They're proven vehicles, and we know there are great foundations in Europe. You're actually in one of them's conference today, but there are others. These are proven examples. Foundations for open source do exist outside of Europe. You'd be surprised to hear. There are some small foundations, like the Linux Foundation and others. Some of you may have heard of them, I don't know. The trouble is with foundations such as those, and they do great work, is that every time we put a project there, every time we pay a membership, we're actually exporting our capital. Okay, so it has to be a decision. So if we want to have digital sovereignty in Europe or in other regions of the world, think about how you're investing locally.